Did Jesus live a fully human life? Or because he was at the same time both God and man, was his life here different from the life that we live and life as we experience it? This question has, of course, been already answered by theologians who have established that Jesus was as fully human as you or me in his time on earth. But still, it's a question that each of us may have to wrestle with ourselves and perhaps make a correction in our understanding. Our view of the humanity of Jesus certainly has some bearing on how we hear today's gospel, because from a merely human point of view, it depicts Jesus as willing to heroically endure some rather extreme self-imposed hardships. 40 days completely alone, 40 days without food, 40 days in the Judean wilderness. That Jesus actually did this is without question, but how he really experienced it is perhaps in question, depending on how each of us regards the extent to which Jesus fully experienced our human condition. Did he really feel hunger? Was he really lonely? Was he ever frightened, just as we would be? During the 40 days that we observe now as the season of Lent is a time that is certainly inspired by this gospel account. We are invited to fast now and do so more frequently, but actually we're only required to fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. But even on those 2 days, we're not made to go without food completely, but only to take the equivalent of 1 meal rather than 3. Yet, did we in fact do that last Wednesday? And will we be ready to do it again on Good Friday? If we do abide by this requirement, we probably find it a bit difficult, just as when we're asked to fast for medical purposes. In a world where food is abundant for those who can afford it, we are quite accustomed to never going without, and we tend to be hesitant to voluntarily deprive ourselves of anything, but most especially food and drink. Yet Jesus did this, and he did it for 40 days in an extremely isolated and harshly unpleasant environment, as any who have viewed the Mount of Temptation on the outskirts of Jericho, even from a safe distance, will affirm. What we must challenge ourselves to appreciate, if we don't already, is that Jesus did this as a human being, subject to the same physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual sufferings that we would be vulnerable to experience if we would dare to try the same. So the ultimate question then is why? Why did Jesus do this? Why did he bring this suffering on himself? And the simple answer is that Jesus did this after his baptism to prepare himself for the 3-year public ministry that he was about to undertake. A ministry that, as we look back at it, had as many difficulties as it had successes. A ministry which would eventually lead to his rejection by religious leaders and to his condemnation by the Roman authorities, condemnation to a horrible crucifixion and terrible death. While Jesus did not have detailed foreknowledge of exactly what was in store for him, he knew he could not escape being controversial. Thus, he knew he was fated to face fierce opposition And so he needed to prepare himself to do that, and to do it without giving up. So we might rightly conclude that the 40 days of prayer and fasting, isolated on a barren mountaintop in the Judean desert, was for the purpose of strengthening Jesus for what he sensed was about to come. At the end of this disengagement from food, from human company, and comforts of any sort, that Jesus would be able to resist the truly attractive enticements presented to him by the evil one, is certainly proof positive that his Spartan-like physical and spiritual training was having its desired effect. So then, we are being challenged to the same. No, we aren't expected to go to the same lengths of isolation and deprivation that Jesus was willing to embrace for 40 days. But beginning today, as day one of the official season of Lent, we are being invited to disengage and self-deny so as to end up physically and spiritually stronger than we are at the present moment when Holy Thursday evening arrives to conclude this annual season of prayer, fasting, sacrifice, and charity. Indeed, Jesus teaches us by his extreme example that to be more deeply connected to God, we have to be more disengaged from the world. And to gain personal and spiritual strength, in short, self-mastery, we have to practice self-denial, starting with the most basic of our wants, which is that for food and drink. This is the wisdom of the ascetics who have gone out to the desert in imitation of Jesus since the earliest days of Christianity. It is the manner in which monastics try to live even in our own day, and it is an example that provides an ideal which we must strive for, if only for just 40 days a year. Why? Because we need to be strengthened too. Because as disciples of Jesus, we face a similar risk of rejection because of our faith, especially if we take it seriously. And we will encounter many difficulties trying to live that faith and thus proclaim the gospel in a world ultimately hostile to its principles of compassion, mercy, justice, and charity, as taught by Jesus' own word and example. We should also expect to have to face the tempter, who actively seeks out any he feels he does not yet truly have. So even at this very moment, he is probably suggesting to some among us that we don't need to take Lent seriously. What's this guy talking about? At all times, Satan constantly entices us to take the way of the world rather than that of the kingdom. He subtly urges us to selfishly consume whatever we want, thus to take risks with our lives and our health here and now for our own self-satisfaction. Thus he lures us in putting God to the test by expecting that God should save us from the consequences of our own excesses here, and still expect that he will also save us forever hereafter, even while demanding the freedom to live by our own lights in this world rather than by his laws. If we are to succeed in resisting these temptations from the Prince of Lies, then we truly need to fortify ourselves. So let us let Lent provide that annual opportunity. Let us happily embrace its disciplines, its invitation to disengage more from the world, so as to be freer to engage more in worship, prayer, and contemplation, by which we can more closely encounter God. and to say no to ourselves more frequently, such that will we be strengthened to say yes to God and to say it concretely by denying ourselves so as to be able to more generously share with God's children who are in true need. Yes, it's going to be challenging. Yes, it might be difficult, but not anywhere near as difficult as what Jesus willingly subjected himself to for 40 days on a barren mountaintop outside of Jericho. So as true disciples, let us try to follow Christ's example by trying to live quite differently during this season we call Lent, so that we will end up being more and having more in so many important ways because we dared to engage and indulge ourselves in so much less for the next 40 days.